First, thanks everybody for coming today and spending part of your day with us. My name is Jeff O'Handley. I'm Program Director for the Otsego County Conservation Association. And we have some people from various places. I'll give the quick intro. Otsego County Conservation Association is a private nonprofit environmental organization. We're based just outside of Cooperstown, though we work throughout Otsego County. We are dedicated to promoting the appreciation and sustainable use of Otsego County's natural resources through education, advocacy, resource management, research, planning, and practice. We've been around since 1968 and were originally formed by a group of citizens who were concerned primarily about sustainable forestry. As often happens with nonprofits, over time the mission has grown to include pretty much all areas of our natural environment, including water quality, recycling and solid waste, municipal planning, et cetera, and so forth. We have been involved in invasive species, both education and management for quite a long time. I've been with the organization, oh gosh, since 2013, I guess, and I'm primarily in education as well as the invasive species work. We have a full-time staff of 3 people and a couple of part-timers and seasonal employees. And today's program will be presented by our invasive species intern, Sierra Stickney. I hope I said that right. I did say that right. Just a couple of things as we get started. Our program today, we've since the pandemic has kind of prevented us from getting together in person, we have started to do some online programming. We started with a spotlight on invasive species last month on the emerald ash borer. Today we're looking at a few species of aquatic invasives to watch for. Next month we are going to do something on the wild parsnip. Not so wild about wild parsnip. And, these are an opportunity to get people together, to learn a little bit about these different species, things, again, invasive species to watch out for, what to do, how to identify them. It's not quite as fun, perhaps, as getting together and pulling water chestnuts out or chopping down Japanese knotweed, but, we're hoping to see people getting involved this way. Okay? Just a couple of the ground rules. We're requesting that, everybody's muted upon entry, but please keep the microphones muted unless we ask you to unmute them at some point. Some of you may be eating lunch, which is what I was hoping to do, and we, don't want to hear chewing or anything, dogs barking in the background, etc. Please say hello using the chat feature. Okay. And also use the chat for questions. Okay, the chat box for questions. We will be monitoring it throughout the course of the presentation. And while I believe that Sierra will primarily be holding questions until after each section, you can use that feature to ask questions at any time, and we'll kind of round them all up at the appropriate time. With that, I'm Sierra. I hope you're ready to unmute yourself and start the program. Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay.
1 second.
Whoops. That shouldn't be there, but that's okay. We'll leave it up for later.
Okay.
That was my mistake. So for those of you who are just joining us, there we go. Thanks, Eileen. Thanks for checking in. Please use the chat, say hello. And okay, Sierra, you're on.
Okay, so I'm going to leave my video off for the presentation just because I find it very distracting. But before we go into the presentation, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Sierra Stickney. I'm a SUNY Oneonta student. This upcoming year, I'll be a senior. And my major is biology, concentrating in ecology and conservation. And here are 2 photos of me. Okay, let's begin. So today I'd like to focus on 3 aquatic invasive species: water chestnut, European frogbit, and starry stonewort. First, we'll have a quick introduction about what aquatic invasive species are. They're also known as AIS. Then we'll go into what water chestnut is, what does it look like, why is it harmful, and do that for frogbit and starry stonewort. And then we'll discuss what you can do to stop the spread. So first, what are aquatic invasive species? They are any non-native species that will harm the environment, economy, or human health. Usually when you have an aquatic invasive species in a water body, it is very hard to eradicate it or completely eradicate it. And the picture to the right shows someone's boat anchor, and within the mud, there's a bunch of zebra mussels. I will not be talking about zebra mussels today, but that is a very well-known aquatic invasive species, and in the Great Lakes, they're having a lot of issues trying to eradicate that, and throughout Otsego County. AIS also reduce the biodiversity in water bodies, which is diversity in a lake will help maintain the health. And if you don't have a lot of biodiversity, the health of the lake could be at risk, or any type of water body. So first we'll discuss what water chestnuts are. Water chestnuts are native to Europe, parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. So basically everywhere else but North America. And they're introduced to the Hudson actually in the late 1800s. And they're at Harvard University and their botany museum, and then they got released into the Hudson. So now they're in New York and wreaking havoc. Some things to look for when you're trying to see if you have water chestnuts are the triangular shaped leaves. And these leaves have toothed edges. So if you notice in my circle here, these are little ridges along the leaves edge. They also have an air bladder, and this air bladder helps keep the leaves afloat on top of the surface. They also have if you look at this circle, they have a flower, and this flower has white petals, although you can't tell from this picture. They have white petals, and they bloom during June. So right about now is when you would see these flowers on the plant. They also have a stem right here, and this stem can be anywhere from a few feet to 15 feet long, so it takes up a lot of space in the water column, and that's why it's one of the issues of it. If you notice the leaves down here, these are not roots, these are actually submerged leaves, and you might notice that they resemble water milfoil, but that's just part of the stem. The submerged leaves help take in nutrients from the water for the plant. And then up here we have what's called the fruit or nutlet. And these fruits or nutlets have seeds within them that can be viable for up to 12 years, according to the DEC, which is why they are such an issue, because once these nutlets detach from the plant, they will spread everywhere. And even if you think it's dried out or no longer harmful, it actually could continue to spread the seeds around for up to 12 years. So sometimes before these fruits and nutlets mature, they'll look green instead of this grayish color. So you might find this on the plant and not know that it's a nutlet because of the coloration, but it is indeed a nutlet. It's just not mature yet. And then in the right picture is me holding a handful of these nutlets. I actually found these on somebody's trailer carpet. They had a carpet bed, and they stuck to the inside of the carpet bed when they were trying to launch their boat. So that's one of the issues, is that they will get caught on the bed of the trailer, and you may miss them because they are dark in color, so they kind of blend in. But what you really need to notice about these nutlets is that they have 4 barbs on the end, and not only does this help you distinguish the nutlet from other things that might be floating in the water, but they're also super sharp. So if you're swimming or just wanting to walk into the water, they can cut up your feet. I know when I was doing a water chestnut pull, I accidentally leaned on my paddleboard and leaned on one of these, and it hurts a lot. So that's one of the ways that water chestnut can harm human health, is that these little nutlets have very, very sharp barbs at the end. So when you're kayaking or boating or just going for a swim, if you want to know what it looks like when you see these in the water, this is how they look on top of the surface. The leaves form a rosette formation, just like this. And then around this time, you would see a white flower right in the middle. It's very common for them to be among water lilies, duckweed, like in this photo, and along the edge of the water. So this is where water chestnuts are located in the United States. So you can tell that there's a lot of locations in New York State that they're found, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, parts of Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. So they're continuing to spread. And then here's a map of Otsego County. I use this map using IMAP Invasives, which I'll talk about at the end of this presentation. But all of these little orange dots, if you can see, are known locations of water chestnut. There's no dot here in Otsego Lake, but I'm pretty sure there was some there. But yeah, all these little orange dots are known cases of water chestnuts. So, like I said, I'll discuss IMAP invasives later, but if you create your own account, you can go to this map. It's public to anyone, and you can check to see if the water body that you want to go visit has water chestnuts. So what happens if we do not manage water chestnuts? Well, just like this picture shows, instead of having a nice open space to go kayaking and swimming and all those recreational activities, you cannot, because there's a huge dense mat of water chestnuts in your way. And like I said before, these nutlets are very sharp and will hurt you, so you can't even walk in this water without stepping on one. And not only are they no fun for recreational activities, but these dense mats have the potential to kill native plants because they block out the sunlight, so native plants cannot do photosynthesis, and then this reduces the oxygen levels in the water, so now the fish can't breathe. So it's more than one issue here. Are there any questions about water chestnuts so far?
While we wait for some questions, this is Jeff. I also add that in Otsego County, one of the largest concentrations for the water chestnut was found in Goodyear Lake. OCCA and the Goodyear Lake Association have been working for about 15 years now on eradication by pulling by hand. And I was not involved in some of the early pulls, but I know that one of the first weekends that they did a pull, they got a dump truck from the town of Milford and basically filled it. And people who were there said you wanted to cry because it felt like you hadn't made a difference. You'd be pulling literally tons of water chestnut out of the water over a few hours and felt like you didn't make a difference. With lots and lots of effort by probably hundreds of people over those last 15 years, it's been reduced to the point now where you spend more time kind of patrolling in the water and finding, oh, here's two, here's a small patch here. We were just out on the water on Sunday, this past Sunday, and we did find what we filled like a half-filled a 13-gallon garbage bag with water chestnuts there this year, but we'll be back out there again in the future. And I'll also mention that OCCA is in the second year of a 3-year grant, which is part of a big part of Sierra's work this summer is scouting water bodies in the county for, I know, our next species as well as water chestnut. So we're looking to document the locations of water chestnut in the county and finding, hopefully not finding new populations. So I will step back out again.
So are there any questions for water chestnut so far? I cannot currently see the chat, but if you have asked a question, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
I was going to read this from
Yes.
Erica. She asks, is water chestnut more likely to be near boat accesses, or can the nutlets move fairly well in fast flows?
So water chestnuts can be found near boat launches, but they don't, it's not like they particularly grow near boat launches, but they can be found there. Also, once the nutlet detaches, it can float anywhere, and having a stronger current definitely helps the spread of the nutlet and therefore more plants. Are there any other questions?
Yes, Shane asks, is the main issue that they block sunlight?
No, that is not the main issue. That is one of the issues. Like most invasive species, they have several problems with them. So blocking out sunlight is more of an environmental issue because it limits the amount of sunlight to native plants that might be submerged below the surface. And then because the sunlight is blocked to these native plants, then the amount of oxygen in the water could be lower than if the water chestnuts were not there.
And I will also add that you'd seen that image with the half of the lake covered by water chestnut. It becomes an impediment to, oh, there it is. It becomes an impediment to boating, swimming, fishing, recreation for people, as well as for the native wildlife that can't really, the fish and wildlife that can't get really through there very well.
Exactly. And some invasive species harm more of the environment or they harm more human health, but water chestnut does all three of the bullet points that I went over. It harms the economy, the environment, and human health, so it's definitely a huge issue. Are there any more questions? Okay,
That's it for now.
I will be moving on, but if you did have a question or you'll have some later, we can discuss at the end of the presentation as well. So now we'll be discussing European frogbit. European frogbit is native, as you might have guessed it, to Europe and also parts of Asia and Africa. So some ways you can see if you actually found European frogbit is that it has white flower. It has a white flower within the middle of the plant, and it has 3 petals. There's also a turion right here that will detach from the stem once it is mature, and it'll float down the water body and make more European frogbit. There's also a stem that creates a horizontal runner along the side that'll attach to other European frogbits. And you might notice that the leaves are heart-shaped, similar to when a water lily is first growing. It kind of has this heart-shaped look, but it is different. So those are a couple of features that you can use to see if you have identified European frogbit. The leaves are also about a ½ inch to maybe 2 inches across. So they're not that big of leaves, and they feel leathery. If you rub them between your fingers, you'll notice it has a very leathery texture, sort of like water lilies. So again, here is the turion. It's the small seed-like part of the plant that pods and creates new plants. And this is what on the picture to the right, this is what European frogbit looks like naturally, not photo form. Again, notice the 3 petals on the white flower and the heart-shaped formation of the leaves. Another way you can see if you determined that it is European frogbit is by looking on the back side of the leaf. So the back side of the leaf has this very spongy like formation, and you might notice that this picture of European frogbit to the right has it also tattered edge to the leaf. So just because it's not perfectly heart-shaped doesn't mean it's not European frogbit. So you can also look on the underside of the leaf and notice the spongy formation, which you would not find on water lilies. Speaking of which, here are some plants that we'll go over that might look like European froglet from a distance, but are not. One example is the yellow water lily. All the way from the left, you'll notice that the leaf is almost heart-shaped, but not quite. It's a bit more longer than the European frogbit picture, as you can see here. Water lilies also have a rhizome, which is shown in the middle picture. This is like a huge part of the plant that will eventually root itself into the ground. So you can think of this as the aquatic part of the aquatic plant version of the roots. And then on the right picture, you'll notice that this is the underside of the same water lily leaf that you'll see all the way to the left. And if you look at the underside of water lilies or yellow water lilies, they do not have that sponge-like formation you'll find with European frogbit. This is what a yellow water lilies look like floating on the surface. They look a lot different than European frogbit floating on the surface. Again, notice the giant rhizome at the bottom and how the leaves are not exactly heart-shaped. This is what mature yellow water lilies look like when they're in a water body. Their leaves are much, much bigger than European frogbit. It's hard to tell from this picture, but they're actually almost a foot across compared to only 2 inches across on European frogbit. The flower is also a lot different. Not only is it different in color, but different in shape. It has a more bulb-like formation and has more than 3 petals. You could also get European frogbit mixed up with white water lilies. As you'll notice, white water lilies have a white flower in the middle. Upon first glance, if you're looking at a juvenile white water lily, you might think you found European frogbit because of the flower, but as you might have noticed, this flower has way more than just 3 petals. It also has a different shape than the European frogbit flower. Again, white water lilies have large pinnate leaves that are much bigger than the European frogbit leaves. They are not heart-shaped, and they also have an anchored rhizome that is not seen in this picture, but it looks similar to the one you saw in the yellow water lily, right here. So a little bit of a harder look-alike is the native frogbit. This might have you confused with European frogbit because it looks almost identical. One major way to tell that this is not European frogbit is by looking at the flower. The flower in the middle, as I've identified here, is spiky, has spiky petals instead of the nice typical flower-shaped petals you'll see on the European frogbit. It has way more than 3 petals, and the leaves are not as heart-shaped as in European frogbit. So European frogbit is spreading from Michigan to New York. Again, it was introduced from parts of Europe and is slowly spreading throughout New York. Here's a picture of Otsego County. So right now, there's detections of European frogbit just on the outskirts of Otsego County. So if you're fishing or boating anywhere near Otsego Lake and Clark Pond, you might want to be particularly aware of European frogbit because we do know that it's just right outside Otsego County. And so what happens if European frogbit goes unmanaged? Well, just like water chestnut, it creates this dense mat that covers the surface of the water and again can block out the sunlight to native plants, reducing oxygen levels. It's also hard to paddle through this dense mat, so that limits the recreational activities that can be done on this water body. Also, I forgot to mention with the water chestnuts, but if you have a lakefront or pond front property, you're not this this lowers the property value that that you have on your house, because no one wants to sit and look at the lake, and instead of seeing a beautiful lake, they see a bunch of European frogbit. Um, so that's another way that I didn't mention with the water chestnut, but is similar with the water chestnut, is that it can depreciate lakefront property value. Are there any questions about European frogbit? Okay. Nope. All right, moving on. So now we will talk about Starry Stonewort. This is completely different than the first two species we just talked about. Instead of being a surface level plant, this is actually a submerged plant, and it's not even a plant, it's a macroalgae. But many people think it's a plant. Some ways to, well, this one's native to parts of Europe and Asia. So unlike water chestnuts and frogbit, it's not found in Africa. Some ways to determine if you found Starry Stonewort is by looking at the whorl in the middle. So this is called the nodal cell center, and that's where branchlets will start to form, and it's usually branchlets of about 6, and that'll create the whorl. The branchlets also create a fork at the end that you'll see here. And also at this fork right here, what is what we call the nodes, you might notice orange beads. I cannot find a good picture to show you what these beads look like, but Canadrigo has Starry Stonewort, and you'll notice that a lot of the Starry Stoneworts there will have these orange beads, and these are the male reproductive structures of the plant. And because they're so small, they might go undetected, so you might get Starry Stonewort in your boat, and then this bead falls off into your kayak, and you may not notice that you have it there because it's so small. And that's how this plant can spread from place to place. Also, you might notice that if you crush the plant between your fingers and hold it up to your ear, it makes a popping noise. That's also a great way to determine if you found Starry Stonewort. Another reproductive feature of this plant are these little bulbils. They're about 1 millimeter in size, and that's what gives this plant its name, Starry Stonewort, because they look star-shaped. They're white, and they'll attach to the edges of this macroalgae. And they're very, very small, like I said. So just like the orange beads that you might find on the nodes of the plant, they're super small, so they could go undetected, and that's another way that this macroalgae can spread from place to place. A lookalike for this species is the chara. This is a native macroalgae. Upon first looking at it, it looks just like Starry Stonewort, except if you crush this macroalgae between your fingers and you hold it up to your nose instead of your ears, you'll notice that it has a musky smell. It doesn't make a sound, but it does have a musky smell. And for me, this is the best way for me to determine if it is Starry Stonewort or the native macroalgae, because just like the Starry Stonewort, the chara has whorls and it has similar coloration, so you can't always just look at the branchlets to determine if it is chara versus Starry Stonewort. One of the reproductive features of this plant is not the star-shaped bulbils or the orange beads. It's actually oogonium, which are these small little seeds that you might notice along the edges of this plant. That is what this macroalgae uses to reproduce. So you will not see any of the star-shaped bulbils or the orange beads. So if you don't see that and it smells musky, there's a good chance that it's not Starry Stonewort and it's just chara. So this is the current locations as of March 7th for Starry Stonewort. And this is the locations of Starry Stonewort in Otsego County. So currently it is in Otsego Lake, and like I said before, Canandaigua. I worked as a boat steward for Canandaigua last summer, and that was one of the biggest issues. A lot of boaters complained that they couldn't paddle through this dense meadow of Starry Stonewort, and they couldn't go fishing because their lines would get tangled in this mess. So that is one of the huge issues with Starry Stonewort. As you can see here, the picture all the way to the right is what it looks like underneath the water. You might notice that you can't see anything else but Starry Stonewort. So unlike water chestnuts and European frogbit, instead of causing issues on top of the surface, this macroalgae causes issues below the surface. This dense meadow prevents fish from spawning, and it crowds out native plants. This crowding leads to a decrease in diversity, which is important to the health of the lake. And the picture to the left, I'm holding a handful of Starry Stonewort that I found on this person's truck, for their trailer, sorry. And they didn't even notice they had it on a trailer until I pointed it out. And I was like, look it, this is Starry Stonewort. It has orange beads on it. If you crush it, it makes a noise. And the boater didn't even realize that this was, first of all, an invasive species, or that it was on his trailer. Are there any questions about Starry Stonewort? No? Okay, moving on. So now that we know a little bit about water chestnuts, European frogbit, and Starry Stonewort, what can we do to stop the spread? One major thing you could do to stop the spread is by joining IMAP Invasives and creating an account. It's super easy, it's free, it takes about 5 minutes. When I created an account, it didn't take any more than 5 minutes, and it was pretty easy to do. So anytime you go to a water body and you're not sure what invasive species it has there, you can always click on View Public Map, and it'll give you a list of species, invasive species that are there. Or if you think you found water chestnut, European frogbit, or Starry Stonewort, you can go to the map and create an identification bubble, like you saw in this map. You can create your own little orange hexagon to add to the map, and that'll let other people know that you found water chestnut, European frogbit, or Starry Stonewort. Another thing you can do is clean, drain, or treat your watercraft. The picture to the right is me washing someone's boat at Canandaigua Lake. I don't know if you guys know this, but they actually have a power washer set up. You just pull your boat up onto this black tarp, and then they can wash your boat for you. If you see anyone in a blue vest like I have pictured here, or a yellow t-shirt, they are boat stewards, part of the CRIS program, which stands for Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership. And if you have any questions about the invasive species of the lake or pond that you are visiting, and you see someone in a blue vest, they can answer all your questions for you about that particular water body, and they can also help you clean your watercraft. So it's very important before you go to any water body that you clean out your watercraft by using hot water, vinegar, bleach, or potassium chloride. Potassium chloride is non-corrosive to your watercraft. It's actually edible. A lot of people will use new salt, which I have pictured here, as a salt substitute for high blood pressure. So it's not harmful. If it doesn't have any odor as well, so if you don't want to use vinegar because you don't want to smell like vinegar all day, that's, yeah, I wouldn't want to either. Or you don't like bleach. I know a lot of people are very sensitive to the smell of bleach and they don't want bleach on their kayak. Then you can use potassium chloride solution. So you can find potassium chloride solution at any hardware store, anywhere they sell rock salt. You can probably find potassium chloride. And what you want to do is get a gallon bucket of water, and you just get a handful of potassium chloride tablets and you throw them in there, And the idea is that you want to keep throwing salt in there until it can't dissolve. When it stops dissolving, you know you have a high concentration of potassium chloride solution, and that'll help disinfect your watercraft. Then you will take a rag or towel or whatever you have and dunk the rag in there, and then scrub your watercraft down. You want to scrub the inside and the outside. Any crevice that could have water or that plants could get in, that's where you want to clean. And then once you've disinfected it, you want to drain out the excess water, and then that's what you want to do before you go to any water body. Another thing you can do to help stop the spread of invasive species is you can join group polls. I know because of COVID-19, it's kind of hard to join group polls right now, but just look at the OCCA website for more information on future group polls. This picture is from a water chestnut poll that the OCCA did, and as things start to open up again, like I said, just keep an eye out for any updates on the OCCA website. Thank you all for listening. I know we ended a little short today, but that's just because I want us to be able to discuss more about aquatic invasive species, or if anyone had any questions, we can use this time to discuss. So let me just turn on my video now so you can all see me finally. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. So does anyone have any questions about what I discussed today, or any comments, concerns?
There is a question in the chat bar there. How is Michigan dealing with these invasive species? Removing them by hand, chemically killing the plants? From Eileen.
Okay, so yes, Michigan is a huge center for a bunch of aquatic invasive species, more than what I just discussed here. And they have tried removing them by hand. They also have these huge machines that'll go in and kind of turn the plants over. So instead of hand pulling, they have a machine that does it. I'm not sure what chemicals they'd use to kill the plants, but they might. You'd have to go to michigan.gov/invasive species to know what type of chemicals they'd be using in the lake. I'm not sure on that.
Right, and I would add that I'll video myself too. Oh, scary. I will add that how a locality deals with invasive species will depend on many factors, whether they're using mechanical means or chemical means. Depends on budgets. It depends on the extent of the infestations, and depends on the species as well. In some cases, you might find that putting people out in canoes to pull by hand, it is not going to work, and you would need either one of those mechanical harvesting boats or chemical sprays. Some of the species, I know they're always looking for biocontrols as well. I don't know of any off the top of my head for the species that we were looking at today. I think there's some work being done on water chestnut, but I'm not 100% sure where that is now. Is anyone doing this work in Otsego County besides OCCA?
Well, like I mentioned before, there's this partnership called CRISP, and they have boat stewards throughout Otsego County and the Catskill region, posted at boat launches. So before people go in with their kayak, canoe, any type of watercraft, the watercraft is inspected before it goes in for any aquatic invasive species and when it leaves. So that's one of the ways that people are trying to prevent the spread of IIS.
Yep, and I'll add that organizations like the Otsego Land Trust are doing controls on either their properties or in some cases the properties that they have easements on. I believe the Soil and Water Conservation District is doing some invasive species work in some of the properties that they work on as well. How do you dispose these invasive plants?
That's a good question. At a lot of the boat launch sites, you'll see a brown box, and the brown box says invasive species disposal. So you're supposed to put them there if you find them on that water body. You can also put them in a garbage bag like we did on Sunday and dispose of them that way. You just want to make sure that they don't enter the water again. So don't just put them on the edge of the shore where you found them, because then they could wash back into the water body. And don't flush them down the toilet. I know someone asked me the other day if you can flush it down the toilet. Don't do that.
And Kelsey, I'll also add that when we do a pulling event, either at Silver Lake or Goodyear Lake with OCCA, the facility that we work out of has a large composting operation, and water chestnuts in particular, frogbit, most of the aquatics are very easily composted in this property. So we transport them back, make sure that they aren't falling off the truck or out of the truck anywhere along the way, and then we compost them. The picture that Sierra showed of the canoes on the water was over at Silver Lake, and the property owner there lets us compost them right on his property, one of the property owners. So, and then Eileen asks, I may have missed this, but if not, how long has the level of invasive species been measured in Otsego County? Is the level being held constant?
Jeff, do you know the answer to that? I would not know that answer.
Um, that's a good question. I've how long have they been measured? I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure how long people have been looking at it, to be honest with you. I know that the Biological Field Station put together a really interesting poster that graphed the number of invasive species by the date of their arrival and compared it to the native biodiversity. So here's hand motions here. As the invasives were going up, the natives were coming down in terms of biodiversity. So they had dates, rough dates, where they knew that this invasive was introduced and a date where this native was last seen. And that's really interesting. And that goes back, I think that goes back into the 30s or 20s even. I would say that the level is not being held constant. We have species that have been, come into this region in the last few years. Emerald ash borer, for example, is, new in the county, probably just 5 or 6 years back. The frogbit is fairly new in the county. It's currently only known in 2 locations in Otsego County. It may already be in more. That's also part of what Sierra is doing this summer, is looking for frogbit. So the unfortunate thing is it feels like there's always something new coming in, unfortunately, but we try to stop them as best we can. And then we have a question: when composting water chestnuts, how do you deal with the nutlets? Very carefully.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like I said, the nutlets can be viable for up to 12 years. And the person who, if you remember my handful of the nutlets, that person didn't launch their boat for 5 years. And that was the first time they launched it, and I found water chestnuts. So I'm not really sure how you would compost them, because if he hasn't launched his boat in 5 years and I was able to find them, I don't think they do compost. Or it takes a very long time.
Well, when there are nutlets, we do compost them up at Mohican, and there is a little bit of a difference between a nut sitting on a boat trailer and it may dry out or it may not, versus one that's in a compost heap that's heated and has biological activity going on in there. So they do compost pretty well. Really actually the best way to deal with the nutlets is to harvest or collect the plant before the nuts form. So, early season activity is probably best. In Otsego, we find the nuts don't start forming until August typically. So we try, we'll collect as late as we have to, but we will, we try to get the plants as much as possible before they flower and go to seed. So that's pretty much it. And as far as I can tell, once the nutlet has germinated, I don't know that nutlet will germinate again, once it's there, but I'm not sure. So,
Right. Yeah.
and Frank says, how can we help?
So like I mentioned before, you can create an IMAP invasives account and map anytime you see a water chestnut, European frogbit, or starry stonewort. You can also make sure that your watercraft is always cleaned before you enter any water body. This will help stop the spread. And like I said, some parts of the plant, like on the starry stoneworts, those beads are super, super small. So making sure that you not only clean your boat, but you disinfect it and treat it, that can help stop the spread.
Right. And I'm going to take over the screen for 1 second and also mention that we ourselves are not doing quite as much with public out, together right now until we kind of figure out how we can do it safely. But there are still other activities and programs that are going on. The events on June 17th and July 8th are OCCA events that you can find information out at our website, occcainfo.org. So we'll be doing a training session on getting started with IMAP invasives. And then on July 8th, I mentioned earlier, we're doing a program on wild parsnip. This Friday, Hidden Aquatic Invasive Species, which is a program that is looking at some aquatics that are on the almost microscopic level, I believe. And you can find that at the New York Invasive Species Awareness Week website, which is at the bottom, nyisaw.org/events. And two of the species that we featured today, the water chestnut and the European frogbit, are being featured as part of the 2020 IMAP Invasive Species Mapping Challenge. And there is a webinar on the 24th on getting started with that from 1 to 2:30 that is available through the New York mapinvasives.org website for information on how to register there. So so Frank, I guess part of how you can help is becoming aware by programs like this, and then when you're out on the water, keeping your eyes open. And then, as Sierra mentioned, certainly practicing good clean, drain, and treat practices. So, is water meal an invasive? Was another question that came up.
I don't believe that watermeal is an invasive. It might be considered a nuisance if you have a lot of it, but I don't think it's considered an invasive species.
I honestly don't know enough about it, but I will look.
Yeah, it's kind of clumped in with duckweed, and it's a free-floating plant, but I don't think it's considered an invasive because it doesn't harm the economy, human health, or the environment.
Right. And I think you're right, Sierra. I do believe it is listed as a potential nuisance.
Right, right, but not necessarily invasive.
Right.
Any more questions or discussions?
All right. Well, I'm sorry. I'll let Sierra say thank you.
Well, thank you everyone who joined the webinar today. Thank you for listening to me go on about water chestnuts, European frogbit, and starry stonewort. I hope this helps you identify them if you think that you found one. And hopefully this was an educational experience and you know more a little bit about each of these species. So again, thanks everyone for coming out here today.
Yeah, thank you everybody. And this recording, this is being recorded, and it will be available in a few days at our YouTube channel. We also have a few other recorded webinars on invasives in general, emerald ash borer, municipal planning, and Amy, help me on this. I know Amy's on the call. Going digital for nonprofits. So that's, go to occcainfo.org and look for our YouTube, and you can find these things there. So thank you so much, everybody.